The hallway was full of screams. Someone was banging on the locker doors. A shoe hit the wall and slid down with a thud. And in the middle of it, 15-year-old Keon Harris stood frozen, arms raised, face bleeding, surrounded by 3 officers in full tactical gear. "He has a weapon," one of them shouted. But there was nothing in his hands. Nothing except the pencil he dropped doing homework in detention. Subscribe and tell us where you're watching us from. It was a Thursday. Keon Harris had just turned 15 2 days ago, but he didn't celebrate. No cake, no candles. Just another day of surviving. The school, Madison High in Tallahassee, Florida, was known for its metal detectors, broken lockers, and teachers who never looked students in the eye. Keon had stayed late for detention. Not for fighting. Not for skipping class. But for defiance. His history teacher didn't like that he questioned a quote on the board. "Maybe Lincoln freed the slaves," Keon had said quietly, but that didn't stop the police from treating us like enemies. He wasn't yelling. He wasn't disrespectful. But the room had gone silent. And the next thing he knew, he was in after-school detention for disruptive tone. Now, it was 4:27 p.m. The school hallways were empty. Almost. A janitor pushed a mop bucket down the main corridor. The assistant principal's voice echoed from her office. Keon moved toward the front exit, clutching his half-zipped backpack and a notebook filled with math notes. Then it happened. 3 loud pops, like lockers slamming, but faster. A flash of movement from the east stairwell. Voices yelling. Keon froze. He didn't run. He didn't move. But seconds later, 3 school resource officers in riot vests rounded the corner, weapons drawn, shouting. On the ground. Hands where I can see them. Keon's eyes widened. I didn't do anything. But one officer tackled him before the sentence finished. His backpack spilled open. A pencil skittered across the floor. Weapon sighted. Someone yelled. "That's a pencil!" Keon screamed. But the weight of 2 adult bodies crushed his chest. A knee pressed into his back. Cold metal clicked around his wrists. Blood dripped from his forehead where he'd hit the floor. In the office nearby, a security monitor showed the hallway clearly. A faculty member watched, eyes wide. But she didn't move. Outside, the sun was setting. Kids walked past the school, laughing, unaware that inside, a 15-year-old boy had just been arrested in his own school for fitting the description of suspicious behavior. No charges were read. No Miranda rights. Only silence. Only cuffs. Keon didn't understand where he was. The hallway lights were gone. The air smelled like bleach and metal. His wrists ached, still cuffed tight behind his back. He sat alone in a concrete room with no windows. A single camera in the corner blinked red. No one had spoken to him since the ride in the patrol car. No questions, no explanation. Just silence. His backpack, his phone, everything was taken. His blood had dried against his temple, leaving a crusty trail down the side of his face. Finally, the metal door opened. 2 officers entered. One was a woman with short, blonde hair. The other, a bald man with eyes that didn't blink enough. They didn't ask his name. "You go to Madison High?" the woman asked. Keon nodded slowly. "What were you doing in the East Wing?" "I was leaving detention. I dropped a pencil and a..." "And you matched the description," the bald man interrupted. "Dark hoodie. Black male. Medium height." Keon's mouth went dry. "That's half the school." They ignored him. "We're investigating a threat report," the woman said. "Someone triggered a lockdown protocol. You were closest to the source." Keon frowned. "I didn't even know there was a lockdown." The bald man leaned forward, voice low. "You think you're clever?" Keon didn't answer. The woman stepped out. When she returned, she held a clear bag with Keon's things, his notebook, his keys, and a silver flash drive. "What's on this?" she asked. "My math homework." She scoffed. "Really?" Keon's heart pounded. "It's geometry review, pages 184 to 190. Ask Mr. Lorne. I worked on it during detention." The officers stared at him, unmoving. Then something shifted. The bald one pulled out a file folder and tossed it on the metal table. Inside, for printed photographs. Surveillance stills. One showed Keon walking alone near the east stairwell. Another caught him bending down, picking up the pencil. The third was grainier. It showed a figure, dark hoodie, similar build, holding something near the lockers. But the face was turned away. "This you?" the bald officer asked. Keon looked at the image. "No, that's not me. That's not even the same shoes." The woman looked up sharply. But the bald man said, "Doesn't matter. You're in holding. We'll verify later." Keon leaned back, stunned. "Am I being charged?" Silence. Do I get a lawyer? Still silence. Then, the woman muttered. We can hold minors 48 hours without formal charge if they're a threat to campus safety. That word hit like a punch. Threat. Keon lowered his eyes. He realized something then. They didn't care who he was. Didn't care what he said. To them, he wasn't Keon Harris. He was just a file. A hallway. A race. A hoodie. No name. Just a code. The next morning, Keon was moved. He didn't know where. No windows. No clock. Just a narrow hallway and a guard who didn't speak. His wrists were cuffed again, tighter this time. He was led into a new room. Different from the cold cell. This one had padded walls, 2 chairs, a camera, and a glass window on one side. On the table, a small recorder with a red blinking light. Waiting inside, a tall man in a suit. No badge. No name tag. Just a gray tie and a folder already open. Sit down, the man said. Keon sat, slowly. The man didn't look angry. He looked bored. Keon Harris, age 15, born in Leon County. GPA 3.6. No prior arrests. You tutor kids in algebra club? Keon nodded. The man flipped the folder closed. So tell me, what were you doing planting a threat note in locker 218? Keon blinked. What? The man slid a sheet of paper across the table. Typed in all caps. Bold black ink. Printed school header at the top. This school ain't safe. Something's coming. No name. No fingerprints. No signature. This was found last night, the man said. In a locker 3 doors down from where you were tackled. Keon stared at the paper. That's not mine. We checked your locker. And it was clean. But you're smart. Too smart to leave something in your own locker. Keon shook his head slowly. I didn't write that. I don't even know who uses 218. The man leaned forward. You were in that hallway. You were alone. You matched the description. Keon felt his chest tighten. So now I'm a terrorist? The man smiled slightly. I never said that. But this is serious. These notes. We treat them like weapons. Especially when they come from students, like you. Keon's hands curled into fists under the table. He knew what like you meant. Do you know what could happen if the school presses charges? The man asked. Keon didn't respond. Expulsion. Detention center. Maybe trial as an adult. Depends how this plays out. The man stood, stretched, then walked to the door. I'll give you a minute to think. Confession now makes things easier later. He left. Keon sat in silence, the paper still on the table. His stomach was empty. His eyes burned. But his mind was sharp. He hadn't written anything. He hadn't done anything. But someone wanted this to stick. And now, the system was leaning on him. Pushing, bending, pressuring him to admit to something he didn't do, just to make it stop. The second interrogation wasn't polite. Keon was back in the same padded room. This time, there were 2 men. One was the suited man from before. The other wore a deputy's uniform, arms folded, eyes cold. No greetings. No questions. Just accusation. Your fingerprints were found on locker 218, the deputy said. Keon's breath caught. That's not possible. You touched it, the man in the suit added. We pulled prints off the metal. Front edge. Partial, but enough. Keon shook his head slowly. I didn't touch any locker but mine. I walked straight down the hall. I dropped a pencil. That's it. The deputy raised an eyebrow. So we're fabricating prints now? Keon stared at them both. I want a lawyer. Silence. The suited man tapped the table twice. This isn't an arrest yet. It's an interview. Minors under investigation don't always trigger automatic counsel, unless charged. Keon felt his stomach turn. He wasn't stupid. He had read, watched, learned from every story like this. They were building a case. One that didn't need to be true. Just believable. The deputy dropped something on the table, a small clear plastic bag. Inside it, a torn corner of a composition notebook. Keon leaned forward. His name was on it. In his handwriting. Just 5 letters. Keon. Found this wedged behind locker 218, the deputy said. Looks like it ripped from one of your notebooks. Keon's mouth went dry. He couldn't speak for a moment. That's not. I never dropped anything like that. And yet, here it is. The suited man sat back, folding his arms. Look, Keon. You're 15. You're smart. I read your record. Advanced classes. Good behavior. Why throw that away now? I didn't do anything. Then help us understand. Explain how your name ends up behind the locker where the threat note was found. Explain how your fingerprints get there. Keon clenched his jaw. He knew what this was. They didn't need proof. They needed a story. One they could tell a school board. One they could file in a report, even if it wasn't true, even if it ruined him. Keon stayed silent. "You're making this harder than it needs to be," the deputy said. "I want to go home." No answer. Just silence. Then the suited man stood up again. "We'll hold you until the paperwork clears. Maybe a night, maybe two. Depends how fast we get the formal charge." He walked to the door. "We'll talk again. And next time, I suggest you come ready to be honest." The door shut behind them. Keon was alone. His hands shook. His throat was tight. But he refused to cry. This wasn't about evidence anymore. It was about power. And they had all of it. The holding room was cold. Keon hadn't eaten in nearly 24 hours. The fluorescent lights above flickered. There was no clock, but he guessed it was well past midnight. He lay curled on a narrow bench bolted to the wall. His hoodie had been taken. Only the thin cotton shirt remained, now damp from sweat and fear. But his mind was awake. And it was working. He replayed every step he took through the hallway. Every locker. Every second. What he touched. What he didn't. The notebook corner. The fingerprints. Something wasn't right. They were manufacturing pieces. Not all of it. But just enough to bury him. Then it came to him. One detail. So small, so quiet, they had missed it. Page 184. The math notebook. It was in the bag they took. He had marked it. Labeled it in pen. His notes were full, margin to margin. That's where he'd written about triangles and slope formulas during detention. But if a corner was found behind the locker, torn off, then that notebook had to be missing a piece, right? Yet it wasn't. He remembered seeing it through the clear bag intact. Whole. Which meant the fragment wasn't from his notebook. And they had lied. He sat up slowly. If he could prove that not to them, but to someone real, someone legal, then maybe there was a way out. He needed a phone, a camera, a witness. But none of those existed in here. Not yet. That's when he heard it. Footsteps. The lock turned. A different officer this time, younger. No expression. "You're being moved." Keon stood, heart racing. They led him down a corridor past rows of empty cells and into a different space, smaller, darker, with a single mattress on the floor and a sink. "You'll stay here overnight." Before the officer left, Keon turned. "Can I ask something?" The officer paused. "The stuff from my backpack, the math notebook. Can I see it?" The man raised an eyebrow. "Why?" Keon shrugged, as casually as he could. "Just want to finish what I started." Page 184. A long pause. Then, to Keon's surprise, the officer nodded. "I'll check." The door slammed shut again. Keon sat back on the mattress, cold concrete beneath him. He didn't know if the notebook would come. But if it did, and it was intact, then he would have something. Not proof. Not yet. But truth. And truth was the only weapon they hadn't taken from him. At 6:13 a.m., the metal door creaked open. Keon sat up fast. The same quiet officer stepped inside. No smile. No hostility. Just a sealed plastic bag in his hand. As requested. Inside, Keon's spiral-bound math notebook. "That's all I'm allowed to give you," the officer added. "No pen. No phone. Just this." Keon nodded. "Thank you." The officer left. Keon placed the notebook on his lap. His hands trembled, but his focus was locked in. He turned to page 184. There it was, geometry review. Full page. Written last night. No corner missing. No tear. No gap. He flipped backward. Forward. Slowly. Every page was intact. His name appeared in ink on the front cover, the same as the torn fragment shown to him yesterday. But the original was whole. They forged it. Or someone planted an old scrap. Maybe from another paper. Maybe with his name copied. But it wasn't from this book. That meant one thing. Tampering. Keon breathed slowly, counting backward from 10 to control his pulse. He remembered what he'd read online, not for class, but out of habit. Chain of custody. Every piece of evidence, once seized, had to follow a documented path. Who touched it? Where it was stored? Who signed for it? If even one person failed to log a handoff, that item became questionable. Corrupted. Dismissible. It was the rule. Even for juveniles. Even for threat cases. Keon stood and walked to the small steel toilet sink combo. He splashed water on his face. Then he returned to the mattress, notebook in hand. He couldn't take photos. He couldn't make calls. But he could remember. Every word. Every detail. And if he ever got the chance to speak to a lawyer or a judge, he would say it clearly. The evidence they claimed was mine doesn't match the physical notebook returned to me. It wouldn't be enough on its own, but it would plant doubt. Doubt mattered. And there was something else. Keon flipped back to the inside cover. There, in small handwriting, was a list he'd made a week ago, books he wanted from the library. Titles like Just Mercy, The Central Park Five, and Gideon's Army. Stories about false arrests. Wrongfully accused boys. Defendants with no money, no lawyers, just facts and willpower. Keon had read them all. He hadn't expected to live one. But now, he understood what came next. They would press again. They would circle him like wolves, hoping for fear, confusion, panic. But today, when they came back, he'd be ready. Late morning. The door opened again. This time, the man who entered wasn't police. He wore a blue lanyard that read Leon County Schools. His name tag read Mr. Holbrook, District Liaison Officer. He was in his early 40s, glasses, thinning hair. Too polite. Too rehearsed. He pulled a chair and sat across from Keon. Keon Harris, I'm here to explain what happens next. You're being considered for emergency expulsion under the school threat protocol. Keon stayed silent. Holbrook smiled awkwardly. This isn't punishment. It's precaution. A temporary move until law enforcement completes their process. You'd be placed in an off-site program. Keon's voice was low. You've already decided? No. But I'm here to collect a statement for the board. Without a lawyer? Holbrook paused. This isn't legal. This is academic procedure. Then I'm not required to speak. The man blinked, caught off guard. Look, Keon, we're trying to help. If you explain yourself now, it'll be easier to support you later. The report says you were near locker 218. Keon cut in, calm and sharp. The fragment they found isn't from my notebook. I have the notebook. Every page is intact. Holbrook frowned. Excuse me? Keon held it up. Page 184. That's where I was writing when they tackled me. I can show you. Holbrook glanced at the walls. At the camera. Suddenly unsure. Well, even so, your fingerprints were. On the hallway door. Maybe on my own locker. But not on 218. You'd need video to prove otherwise. Holbrook stiffened. That footage isn't part of my process. Convenient. The man hesitated again. Are you accusing the officers of misconduct? Keon's eyes narrowed slightly. I'm stating that your board is about to expel a student with no prior record, no verified evidence, based on hearsay and pressure. That's not fair, Keon. Neither is forging a locker note. Holbrook stood suddenly, smoothing his shirt. I'll include your statement in the report. Keon looked him dead in the eye. Include this too. I'm requesting my full chain of custody records for the locker evidence. And a digital log of who accessed my belongings after detainment. Holbrook froze. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. That isn't normally requested by students. I'm not a normal student. For the first time, Holbrook looked nervous. He turned toward the door. I'll follow up. You do that, Keon said quietly. When the door closed, Keon leaned back. No fist fights. No shouting. No threats. Just facts. And facts were harder to bury when someone knew exactly where to look. Keon didn't sleep. Not out of fear, but focus. He replayed the timeline again. The moment the officers charged. The shouts. The accusation. They said it was based on matching a description near locker 218. But something never added up. The locker was around the corner, 3 lockers down. The hallway had no cameras inside, but the stairwell entrance did. He'd seen it once before, when a fight broke out 2 months ago. The footage then had a timestamp. Minutes. Seconds. Frame by frame. Which meant, if he could get the hallway footage, even just a still image, it would show exactly what time he passed locker 218. And if that time didn't match when the threat was supposedly planted, then the whole accusation would crack. He needed the time. And suddenly, he remembered something. Mr. Lorne, his geometry teacher. Strict, unfriendly, but obsessed with punctuality. During detention, he'd written the time on the board as Keon entered and again when he left. He made students copy it onto their worksheet, a weird policy meant to track use of time. And Keon had copied it. Detention start, 3:30 p.m. end, for 25 p.m. The officers tackled him at 4:27 p.m. He remembered because the red digital clock near the cafeteria blinked it as they pinned him down. Which meant, if the note was planted before 4:25, he couldn't have done it. He'd still been inside the classroom. And that wasn't guesswork. That was recorded in the detention sheet. The one teachers had to submit for district logs. He smiled faintly. It was thin, but real. Now he had 3 critical points. 1. Notebook not missing any pages. 2. Chain of custody on evidence not established. 3. Time window excludes his presence at the locker. It wasn't a legal defense, not yet, but it was enough to demand one. If he could speak to a real attorney, if he could file a motion, get a copy of that detention sheet, request surveillance timestamps, this case would collapse. He had to make them blink first. That meant the next time someone came through that door, he'd make a demand. Not a plea, not a defense. A demand. For his rights. For a public defender. And for the dismissal of all fabricated charges based on procedural violation, evidence tampering, and denial of counsel. It was a long shot. But now he had leverage. He wasn't the scared boy in the hallway anymore. He was the threat. To their story. The door opened at 9:12 a.m. Keon was sitting upright, notebook in lap, already waiting. Same suit. Same expression. The man who hadn't blinked in 2 days. He stepped in, followed by a uniformed officer and a school security official with a clipboard. "Mr. Harris, we're wrapping up our internal review. You'll be released pending further." Keon cut in. "No." The man paused. "Excuse me?" Keon stood. "Before I'm released, I want 2 things in writing. 1. A formal record stating I was held without charges for more than 24 hours. 2. Confirmation that the evidence you used has not been reviewed by independent counsel." The officer frowned. "You're not in a position to make demands." "I am, actually," Keon replied, calm but razor-sharp. He held up the notebook. "You accused me of planting a threat note. Said a torn page with my name was found behind locker 218. This notebook is intact, no missing pages. The so-called fragment doesn't match anything inside." The security officer shifted uncomfortably. Keon didn't stop. "You also told me my fingerprints were on that locker. Show me the timestamp. Surveillance camera from the stairwell would have recorded me walking by. If it doesn't match the time of the note's placement, then you lied. Or guessed." The suited man raised his hand slightly. "Keon, calm down." "Don't. Tell me to calm down." His voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. "I'm 15. I've never been suspended. I was in detention with a verified timestamp at the time your note was supposedly planted. That sheet is on file with the district. Mr. Lorne submitted it, like he always does." The room went still. Keon looked at each of them. "So unless one of you wants to explain how I teleported from a locked classroom to a hallway under surveillance, then planted a note I didn't write and tore a page I never lost, I suggest you start thinking about your statement." No one spoke. The suited man broke the silence. "You'll be released this morning. No charges will be filed. The school will complete its review internally." Keon raised an eyebrow. "Am I allowed back?" Another pause. The security officer cleared his throat. "Temporarily reassigned. Off-campus learning. Until it's resolved." Keon exhaled through his nose. A smirk, almost. "You're afraid of me now. Not because I'm violent, but because I remember everything." He turned to the door. "I want my mother notified. And I want a written notice that nothing on my record reflects arrest or misconduct." The suited man nodded, face unreadable. As Keon stepped out, notebook in hand, he didn't look back. They had tried to bury him under lies, but he made them write them down. Keon stood in the school parking lot. A plain unmarked car dropped him off. No handshakes. No explanations. Just a muttered, "You're free to go." He didn't know what free meant anymore. The school was still in session. Students moved between buildings, laughing, checking phones, throwing backpacks over shoulders. But not a single one of them knew what had happened behind those locked walls over the last 48 hours. Keon walked home. 3 miles. Alone. No phone. No coat. Just the weight of his own silence. His mother wasn't home yet. He sat at the kitchen table, placed the notebook in front of him, and opened to page 184. Still there. Still whole. That night, his mother came in after her shift, saw him sitting upright at the table, and froze. "Keon?" He stood. She hugged him before he could say anything. Tight. Desperate. When she pulled back, her eyes burned. "What did they do to you?" Keon didn't answer at first. He just handed her the paper they gave him, a printed notice of temporary removal, with generic phrases like safety reassessment and pending internal closure. She read it twice, then 3 times, then sat down beside him and said quietly, "We're going to fight this." Keon shook his head. "No, I already did." She blinked. He opened the notebook again and pointed to the line he'd written that morning. Not math, not law, just this. "They don't apologize. They just stop talking." His mother looked at the words. then at him. And for the first time, she saw him not as her child, but as someone who had survived something permanent. He didn't cry. He didn't rage. He was too tired for that. The next day, he logged into the school's online portal, watched lectures, turned in an assignment. No teachers reached out. No counselors called. But one email arrived. From Mr. Lorne. Subject, attendance confirmed. Body, Keon, your detention time was properly logged. Let me know if they need a copy. No apology, but a fact. That was enough. 3 weeks later, his mother found a civil rights attorney. For months later, the school district quietly updated his record. No misconduct found. No one called to explain. No one said his name at the next assembly. But Keon knew. He remembered every word they tried to put in his mouth, and every one he chose instead. Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories that inspire action and hope.